Today's episode is going to be a little bit different for a couple different reasons. Number one, I'm shooting it live in person, so if you're listening on Spotify, you're only getting about half the image. And number two, I'm going to be talking about some recent events and my thoughts on them as it relates to what it says in the Word, and some things I think we need to spend a little bit more time focusing on rather than some of the other stuff we're focusing on. So if you're new here, welcome to the Predictions podcast. My name is Nathan. This is episode 31, and today we are going to be very briefly talking about, well, the end times. The reason why I want to talk about this today is because we've been seeing a lot of news, a lot of headlines, a lot of hysteria, a lot of panic, a lot of worry, a lot of things going on that I think, in my opinion, is propaganda, and there's an agenda. There always is. Now, unfortunately, this propaganda, this agenda is coming at the sacrifice of innocent lives of people all over the world. And quite frankly, it is terrible. But one thing I always get drawn to is going back to the Word and reading precisely what it says so that I can have a very clear and understanding idea of what's going to come, why it's going to come, and some things to expect, and how not only that, we should respond as Christians through all of this. So with that being said, we're going to be looking in Matthew 24 today, and we're going to start Matthew 24 verse 3, and we'll skip around a little bit, but we'll end around verse 25. And it's in this segment right here where Jesus is specifically talking about the end times with his disciples, and I like to get his direct words of what he spoke so that we can have a good idea of what we need to understand and prepare for the future. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this conversation started. So Matthew 24, starting in verse 3, this is what it says. Now as he sat down on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you." So the first thing Jesus told him to beware of, to be mindful of, and mind you, these things aren't coming in the disciples' time, and he's speaking directly to the disciples, whom he knows they have proper understanding of who he is, as we discovered in Matthew 16. So he's telling them not to be deceived. And this is one thing I think we really need to pay attention to these days, because there's a lot of bad information out there. There's a lot of fake information out there. All I'm going to say is, if you see it across major news headlines, I wouldn't believe every word that comes out of it. For me personally, I've spent too much time in the intelligence world and seeing various things across various different places to know that if it's in the headlines, someone's making money off of it. So if someone's making money off of it, then there's probably a mutual benefit for them to exaggerate the information, because more viewers equals more money. So that's just my little piece right there. But what Jesus opens with, before even describing the end times to the disciples, is he says, don't be deceived. Something so straightforward, plain and simple. Don't be deceived. And I chop that up to this. Think critically. Think long and hard about every single piece of information you see in the news, in the media, and come to a very positive conclusion for yourself, whether or not that information is true. Because Jesus tells us not to be deceived. So if we can't be deceived, that means we can't blindly follow along with whatever might be going on, despite what might be the most popular opinion. Because mind you, the pathway to the heavenly kingdom, to the gates, Jesus described that as the narrow path, and the wide path led to destruction. So if the wide path led to destruction and the narrow path leads to the kingdom, why do we think as the Christian body that there should be really anything that is collectively viewed upon as the majority decision in something, and believe that might be the best route to go? Just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing. And I'm also not saying that it means it's the wrong thing. I'm saying you need to think critically. Don't believe the numbers that are out there, regardless of what it might be. You need to think critically, because we always know the Christian body is going to be the remnant. It's going to be the few and far between. So don't go along with the masses just because it all looks and sounds good. Don't be deceived. Now, in verse 5, Jesus goes on to say, "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled." I have seen this verse, I've seen this specific scripture repeated over and over and over and over and over again in TikTok, on Facebook, and Instagram, and or YouTube, everywhere I go, I see this just repeated. You're going to see wars and rumor of wars. They're talking about everything that's going on in Israel and Palestine, and it's terrible, right? But here's the thing that Jesus also tells us. He says, see that you are not troubled. You'll see in other translations it says, do not worry. So he specifically tells us, don't worry. Other translations say, don't panic. This translation, New King James, it says, see that you are not troubled. Here's what he goes on to say after that. He says, for all of these things must come to pass. Not that they might, not that they could, not that it's not terrible things to happen. He says they must. They must come to pass. They're serving a purpose. Am I going to sit here and try and dive into the depths of everything that's going on today and tie that into the book of Revelations and how it might correlate, how it might not correlate? No, I'm not. Am I going to try and give you some grandiose reason from biblical standards as to why what's happening is going on is happening? If I wanted to, I probably really could if I dove into the word enough to really try and make an understanding of all that. But here's what I am going to do from the bottom of my heart is trust in the Lord and trust what he said and trust what he wrote to be true for what it is. And he told me I don't need to worry about it. And he also told me and you that these things have to happen. So if these things have to happen, then I'm not going to be troubled over it. I'm not going to panic over it. I'm not going to worry about it. Am I going to still serve every single opportunity that I can to try and tell people about Jesus Christ? Yes, absolutely. And that's going to be my number one prerogative still, and should be also if you're someone who's in the body of Christ. But if we're also out there to be in the world and we start panicking and we start worrying, then we're kind of losing a little bit of that image of what God called us to be, which he told us to be set apart. We should be different. We should be the light of the world. Amidst all the darkness that's going on, people should look at us and not see a panicking face, but someone with confidence because they have a hope that isn't set or limited to the bounds and confines of this physical world that we live in now. So I'm going to live by that where he says, don't be troubled because these things have to come. And following that, he says, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. And this is where things start to get really bad for us, quite frankly. Because in verse 9, Jesus says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. So what I'm trying to say here is this. Even though what we're witnessing right now in the news and the media and the world with the several wars that are going on and the ones that you probably haven't even heard of and the silent ones that are going on behind the scenes, unfortunately, things are going to get worse before they get better. And I think it's actually very important as a Christian body that we're prepared for that we're aware of it, that we're not panicking, and that we can be the example to the world throughout all of it. Now, after this, in verse 15 all the way to verse 22, Jesus describes an even greater tribulation than what we just went through. But I want to skip down really quick to verse 23 because I think this is also very important, and it ties right back to the very beginning of this whole section. But Jesus says, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. He's not going through this accidentally, obviously. He's not going through this just to say it. He's going through this so that we know and can be ready. Over and over and over again does it say in the word that Jesus is going to return like a thief in the night. And if the master of the household knew that his house was going to be broken into, then he would have stayed awake and been prepared for the thief. But then the unwise master is not ready and his house does get broken into because he wasn't prepared. So he told us these things beforehand. So we knew they were going to happen beforehand. So when they start happening, why are we all of a sudden surprised? We know that the human heart is desperately wicked. I don't have the verse right in front of me, but I believe that comes out of Jeremiah. So with that in mind, we know that these things are going to happen, and just we need to focus on a couple key elements of the sections that we just went through. Is we can't be worried about it. Number one, can't worry, we can't panic. We need to have confidence in the Lord that he is ultimately in control, and he foreknew these things were going to take place So he warned us about them. So if he's going to warn us about them, then we need to be prepared for them. The second thing, once again, don't be deceived. A lot of fake information out there, a lot of agendas out there, a lot of benefit out there for deceiving people. So don't fall into those crowds just because they make it look and sound so good. Because remember when Jesus sent out the disciples, he says, I send you out as sheep amongst wolves. Well, who are the wolves? Well, the wolves were technically Israel, who was originally God's people. He called them wolves. Not only did he call them wolves, but he called the leaders of those organizations snakes. He called them serpents. Who were they? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. So the people in charge, and the people that the people were in charge of, were wolves and serpents, and he sent his disciples as sheep out against their natural predators. Then what do you think we're living in the midst in today? Do you think that it suddenly dissipated and disappeared after Jesus died? No, it was the exact opposite. They've been combating against the Christian faith since, well, the church started. So we have to keep these things in mind. We've always been in the minority. So if we've always been in the minority, then the decisions of the masses, we need to pay special attention to, because there is a very high probability and likelihood that it's actually there for whatever decision that might be, is there to deceive us. Third and final thing, which is really kind of what I want to talk about this episode, but here we are, was the piece where Jesus said in verse 24, he says, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive. I don't know if it's just the kind of content I've been looking at recently, but as of recently, it's like everyone's been hopping on this prophetic bandwagon. Everything's a prophecy. There's a prophet this, a prophetess that, and it's like everyone is getting these visions and ideas and concepts of the future. Well, all I want to say when it comes to those things, once again, is be very careful. Whatever piece of anything you hear, measure it against the word. I wouldn't even really, unless you trust someone from the bottom of your heart, I wouldn't measure it against what that other person has to say or thinking about it. I'd measure it against the word. And if you do trust that person and they give you an opinion on it and they can't back up that opinion with the word, well, be careful. That's really all that I'm trying to say. Why? Because start of all this, the first thing Jesus said in verse 4, Matthew 24:4 was, take heed that no one deceives you. Because I don't think people really understand just how important we are to the Lord. It is not his will that even one of these should perish. What is it talking about? The children of God. It is not his will that not even one of us should perish. And so to that extent, what did he do? Well, he sacrificed his only son so that we could have life again after being separated in death. So we could be born again into life, to live eternally with Christ. But he went through that sacrifice for us to make that happen, and ultimately put the choice in our hands to say, all right, which direction do you want to take? Do you want to choose me? If you don't want to choose me, this is the other option, because this is what I'm going to do. This is the plan I've set in place. You can be a part of it if you want, but you don't have to. And if you don't want to, well, since I'm the creator and God of all things, this is the other option. I have to cast it away, because there is no space in the new kingdom for when these good things are to come, the everlasting inheritance, the promise that he set before us. So just kind of bring us to it in here, even though this probably wasn't the most succinct or in order episode that I've ever done, I really just wanted to take the time to bring to light what God directly says about the times that we're living in right now. Because I think more so than any other time in history, it is so important to cling to this word, to read it, to understand it, to meditate on it, to pray on it, because there is an active agenda out there to deceive you, and I don't want to see that for you either. So with that said, I hope you take the time at some point just to read through Matthew 24 and read through God's words and what he physically spoke to us while he was here on this earth. He took the time to say these things, to have them written down and protected through thousands of years, so that way for you and I today, we're not deceived, we're not blindsided, we're not living in panic, we're not living in worry, because that's what the enemy would want us to do. To be panicking, to be worried, to be looking for a savior, and he's going to try and bring one to you, absolutely, so that way you sell your soul for a morsel to eat like Esau. So let's not do that. Let's focus up. stay focused on the word, and God's going to lead us through it, bottom line. So with that, I appreciate you listening today. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you learned something, maybe comment, or maybe comment even what you're reading in the word today that's helping you stay calm and confident and helping you being a light to other people around you as well, because I think that'd be a very motivating thing to read. And I'd like to read whatever you're reading as well, so I can see kind of, where you're at and glean some confidence and encouragement off of you as well. So that being said, I will catch you in the next one. Thanks.